Greetings. There comes a time when your instincts whisper that something is amiss, yet your emotions stubbornly ignore the warning. It arrived on the morning of our 9th wedding anniversary. For weeks, Sophia's behavior had been peculiar, but I attributed it to the pressure of her new project at work. She was adamant that we mark the occasion with a special dinner, just the two of us. That evening, as I drove into the driveway, a wave of excitement washed over me. I clutched the gift box containing the pearl bracelet that Claire had admired at the mall months earlier. A gift that would bring forth that radiant smile, the very one that captured my heart from the beginning. The house greeted me with an unusual silence as I stepped inside, a stark contrast to the usual melody that accompanied Sophia's preparations. The children were spending the night at my parents' house, so I assumed she was upstairs. I shouted, "Sophia, are you ready to go?" No response. With a sense of intrigue, I placed the gift on the kitchen counter and began my ascent up the stairs. That was the moment it caught my attention. A soft murmur of voices wafting in from the backyard. I moved nearer to the sliding glass door, and my heart raced. Softly glowing candles adorned the patio table, while 2 wine glasses rested closely together. Initially, a smile crossed my face, as I believed Claire had orchestrated a delightful surprise. Yet, in that moment, he came into view. A stranger occupied the seat opposite her, leaning in, his hand gently placed over hers. They shared a moment of laughter, their heads leaning in, completely unaware of the world around them. Sophia's face radiated a brightness I hadn't witnessed in ages. I remained motionless, my fingers clutching the doorframe, my thoughts racing to comprehend the scene before me. It wasn't the joy or the intimacy that affected me. It was the depth of her gaze. Her gaze was fixed on him, as if he were the sole inhabitant of the universe. A weight settled in my chest, the atmosphere thickening around me. A part of me yearned to rush out and seek an explanation, yet I found myself frozen in place. Not at this moment. I retreated into the shadows, observing them as they clinked their glasses and exchanged an inside joke that excluded me. The unspoken truth was clear to me, even without the need for words. My universe had just shattered into countless pieces. In the dimly lit kitchen, I found myself lost in thought, grappling with the uncertainty of my next move. I had witnessed enough, yet a part of me lingered, unwilling to take that next step just yet. I rested against the counter, the gift box remaining there, unbothered, as I gazed vacantly at the wine bottle beside it. Claire had been incredibly clear about this evening, expressing her desire for it to be memorable. At last, I grasped the reason, and it was unrelated to my actions. After what seemed like an eternity, though it was likely just a matter of minutes, I made my way back to the glass door. There remained, engaged in conversation and laughter, seemingly oblivious to any worries that might exist. My heart raced, my chest constricted, and every part of me urged to step out there and put an end to this once and for all. Yet, an invisible force restrained me. Instead, I retrieved my phone from my pocket. A wave of nausea washed over me as I opened the camera and pressed the record button. My hands trembled as I focused in on their expressions, on the moment he tenderly tucked her hair behind her ear. She remained close. She acted without a moment pause. I stopped the recording after a brief moment, preserving it for potential future use. I was completely unaware of my own thoughts. I simply required evidence of this moment. With all the composure I could gather, I gently opened the glass door and stepped out into the world beyond. The sudden creak of the door caught them off guard. Claire spun her head, and for an instant, her face became a mask of stillness. She appeared frozen, like a creature startled by an oncoming vehicle, her hands lingering in his grasp. The man reclined a bit, his hand pulling away, yet he remained silent. "Is this a bad time?" I inquired. My voice remained calm, yet within me, turmoil reigned. Claire sprang to her feet, adjusting her dress as though that could somehow wipe away the image that lingered in my mind. "Daniel, you're back early," she remarked, her voice quivering just a bit. "Before the usual time?" I checked the time on my watch. The clock strikes 7:40. Do you recall that we had plans to head out for dinner? She parted her lips, likely to present some justification, but I was not inclined to listen. I glanced over at the man seated at the table. He stood tall and fit, likely a few years my junior. His shirt hung loosely at the collar, sleeves casually rolled up, and he regarded me with an enigmatic expression that eluded my understanding. Who might you be? I inquired, directing my focus entirely towards him. Michael, he said, rising to his feet and offering a hand as if this were a formal gathering. I am a friend of Sophia. I gazed at his hand, yet I refrained from taking it. Instead, I turned my gaze back to Claire. Is it a companion? Claire appeared frantic, her hands gripping each other firmly in front of her. Daniel, this isn't what it seems, she said hurriedly. I arched an eyebrow. Is that so? It seems you've been enjoying a warm evening with a friend while I've been here, waiting for the anniversary dinner you insisted we celebrate. It not what you think, she replied, shaking her head. We were simply having a conversation. Simply conversing. I emitted a brief, mirthless chuckle. That amusing, as I could have sworn I witnessed him grasping your hand. Is that the way you typically converse with your friends? As she began to speak, Michael cut her off. I believe it time for me to leave. That's an excellent idea, I remarked with a hint of intensity. He nodded and moved around the table, deliberately avoiding my gaze as he made his way to the side gate. Once he was out of view, I turned my attention back to Claire. She cast her gaze downward, avoiding my eyes entirely. Within. At this moment, I declared. After a moment of uncertainty, she gave a slight nod and proceeded past me into the house. I trailed behind, gently closing the door as we entered. The kitchen was imbued with an unsettling chill, the atmosphere heavy with unspoken tension. Claire positioned herself by the counter, her arms folded in a protective manner. Begin speaking, I insisted, folding my arms in response. It not what you imagine, she reiterated. So, why not share what it is? It appears to me that you've been involved with someone else without my knowledge. I haven't been sneaking around, she said swiftly. Michael is merely an acquaintance from my workplace. He has been facing some challenges, and I was simply attempting to support him. And grasping his hand? Giggling as if you were out for a romantic evening? Is that simply offering support for him? Her expression was one of frustration, as if she had thoughts swirling in her mind but struggled to articulate them. It not as you think, she reiterated. I promise, Daniel, I never intended for you to come across that. I furrowed my brow. You didn't intend for me to catch a glimpse of it? Is that really your argument? It not that it didn't occur, but rather that you preferred I remain unaware? She averted her gaze, her cheeks tinged with a rosy hue. I never intended to cause you pain. Well, congratulations, I remarked, my tone firm. As a result of your actions. For an extended silence, we remained wordless. The quiet loomed between us, vast and insurmountable. My anger bubbled just below the surface, yet I compelled myself to maintain my composure. Are you currently involved with him? I finally asked. No, she replied swiftly. I explained it to you, it not as you think. So, how does it feel? She paused, her gaze flitting about the room as if seeking a way out. She confessed that we've had quite a few conversations recently. He'd been facing challenges with his wife, and I've been doing my best to support him. Assist him, I reiterated, by engaging in candlelit discussions in our backyard while I remain indoors? I never intended for this to occur, she murmured, her voice trembling. It spiraled out of control. I assure you, nothing of a physical nature has occurred. I gazed at her, attempting to decipher the expressions on her face. I yearned to trust her, yet every aspect of this situation seemed off. Are you harboring any emotions for him? Her silence spoke volumes. My chest felt as though it was collapsing inward. I looked away, running my fingers through my hair as I attempted to comprehend her recent confession. I anticipated refusals, justifications, perhaps even some frustration. However, this is not it. After a brief pause, I insisted, I need you to be honest with me. Everything. At this very moment. After a moment of uncertainty, she gave a slight nod. All right, she murmured softly, but I have a feeling you won't be pleased. Sophia's expression hardened, and she distanced herself from me, as if the gap between us could somehow ease the weight of her impending words. I lingered in that moment, anticipation hanging in the air. My hands formed tight fists at my sides, not from rage, but to maintain my balance. Michael and I began our conversations a few months back, she started, her voice soft and almost inaudible. Initially, it was all quite laid back, discussing work Michaelis and snippets of his personal life. He'd been navigating a separation, and I couldn't help but feel sympathy for him. I remained silent, my gaze fixed intently on her. She cleared her throat and pressed on. As time passed, it became more intimate. He began to share his struggles and emotions with me. He shared with me the depths of his loneliness, and I suppose I made an effort to assist. Do you have an idea? I retorted. Are you certain you were assisting or perhaps fostering something different? Claire recoiled, as if the word struck her with an unexpected force. It wasn't that way, she replied hastily. I never intended for it to overstep any boundaries. Did it really? I inquired. She hesitated longer this time, her gaze dropped to the floor, and her fingers nervously toyed with the hem of her blouse. Not in a physical sense, she concluded, but rather on an emotional level. I'm uncertain. That struck deeper than any admission of physical betrayal ever could. At least that would have provided a solid foundation, something I could tackle directly. Emotional infidelity was more ambiguous, difficult to articulate, and even more challenging to absolve. What could that possibly signify? I inquired, my tone cutting through the air. Are you unaware? It's simple. You were either emotionally invested in him, or you weren't. She inhaled deeply, her shoulders drooping as if burdened by the entire universe. I care about him, Daniel, she admitted, but I didn't realize how much until tonight. The words took my breath away. I stumbled back a step, my hand clutching the counter for stability. You were unaware? What does it, Michaela? You required my presence to uncover the truth in that situation. I didn't want to hurt you, she repeated, her voice now filled with desperation. Please refrain from saying that. I lost my composure. You never intended to cause me pain, yet there you were, entwined with him, sharing laughter as if I were invisible. Are you truly listening to your own words? She appeared on the verge of tears, yet I wasn't inclined to offer her any sympathy. Not at this moment. Is he aware of your feelings? I inquired, my tone subdued yet still incisive. Claire paused, uncertainty flickering in her mind. We've never discussed it, she mentioned, but perhaps, I echoed, so he understands you're married. He aware of my situation, yet he remains out there with you, pretending this is all perfectly fine. He been struggling, she said softly, as if that could somehow make any of this right. I chuckled darkly, shaking my head, and you really believed you could fix his issues by what means? Offering him your focus, your moments, I held my tongue, preventing myself from uttering words I might regret later. It not like that, she insisted once more, yet it was evident that even she had lost faith in her own words. I gazed at her, attempting to reconcile the woman I once married with the figure before me, yet she appeared to be a complete stranger. The manner in which she carried herself, the way she averted my gaze. That wasn't the Claire I remembered. Do you have feelings for him? I finally asked, and her head jerked up, her gaze meeting mine as if I had just delivered a stinging slap. What is happening? You heard me clearly. I asked, do you love him? She shook her head with a swift, almost frantic motion. She replied, no, I love you. Are you? I inquired, my voice wavering a bit, as it truly doesn't seem that way, not this evening, not for the last several months, if I'm being truthful. Her expression twisted, and for a fleeting instant, I feared she might shatter completely, yet she managed to keep herself intact, just on the edge. I truly love you, Daniel, she confessed, her voice quivering. I'm aware of my shortcomings, yet my feelings for you remain unchanged. It alters the entire landscape, I remarked, my voice icy. You can't claim to love me and then act like this. Love doesn't function in that manner. Her silence spoke volumes as she gazed at me, tears glistening in her eyes. I averted my gaze, requiring a brief pause to gather my thoughts. A whirlwind of thoughts consumed me, and a heavy weight pressed against my chest, making it seem impossible to draw in a breath. My trust in her was absolute, and now it seemed as though the very ground I stood on was disintegrating around me. I find myself at a loss for words in this moment, I finally admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm uncertain about how to resolve this, Claire. I'm not even sure if it can be resolved at all. I'll do whatever it takes, she said swiftly, moving closer to me. I'll sever ties, I'll leave my position if necessary, just guide me on the next steps, and I'll follow through. Her desperation may have stirred something in me before, but now, it simply seemed empty. I believe it more complex than that, I replied. You don't just accidentally find yourself in a situation like this. You made decisions, Claire, decisions that caused me pain, regardless of your intentions, and now you expect me to guide you on how to fix it. I'm uncertain if it within my capabilities. Please, she implored, her voice trembling, Just allow me the opportunity to set things straight. I gazed at her intently, pondering whether I could place my faith in her once more, whether trust could be rekindled. Finally, I spoke up, expressing my need for time to reflect on what this signifies for us. She nodded, her tears cascading down her cheeks. Take all the time you need, she said, but as I walked out of the room, her words resonated not as a promise, but as a finality. That night was sleepless. I found myself in the living room, fixated on the empty television screen while Claire wept herself to slumber in the bedroom. I had moved past anger. It was a transient emotion. What took its place was a chill, a keen edge that lingered. Fury can lead to shouting and tossing objects, yet this moment was marked by careful thought. She believed that a handful of tears and some empty promises could mend everything. She thought that severing ties with Michael would erase the sting of humiliation I felt as I watched her pretend I was invisible. But she was mistaken. This wouldn't conclude with her drying her eyes and us simply moving forward. I grabbed my phone and navigated through my contacts until I spotted the name I was looking for, James. He was an old friend from college, the kind of guy who always had a scheme, who seemed to have a knack for getting even while staying within the lines. We hadn't spoken much in recent years, yet I was aware he still had his connections. It was late, but that didn't Michaela to me. I sent him a message, "Need a favor, call me when you can." The call came 20 minutes later. "Daniel, what going on, man?" Mac's voice was groggy yet attentive. "I need your help," I stated, cutting to the chase. "With what?" "Investigating a colleague, Sophia co-worker Michael." There was a moment of silence on the other end. "Colleague, you mean?" "Absolutely," I said. "I spotted them tonight, and I need to uncover every detail about him. His identity, his profession, his marital status. I want to track his movements, his conversations, and the secrets he keeps hidden." James let out a low whistle. "That intense. Are you certain about this?" "Absolutely," I said. "All right," he said, "give me a couple of days, I'll get back to you." The next morning, I acted like nothing was wrong. Claire tried to talk to me over breakfast, but I gave her short, polite answers and nothing more. If she noticed a change in my demeanor, she didn't say anything. She seemed to think that giving me space would fix everything. By the time James called me back 2 days later, I had my game plan. He didn't disappoint. Michael wasn't the squeaky clean guy Claire thought he was. He was separated, sure, but it wasn't because his wife had left him, it was because he'd been caught cheating, with 2 other women, no less. His soon-to-be ex-wife was fighting for full custody of their kids and had already subpoenaed his work emails as evidence of his infidelity. It was perfect. That evening, I told Claire I needed to run some errands. She didn't question me. I drove straight to Michael's house. A modest townhouse about 15 minutes from ours. His car was parked out front. I knocked on the door, and he answered after a few moments, looking confused. "Daniel, right?" he inquired, his brow furrowed. "Sophia husband?" "That me," I said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. He closed the door behind me, still looking puzzled. What are you doing here? We need to talk," I said. "Look, if this is about Claire." "It is," I interrupted, "but not in the way you think." He crossed his arms, leaning against the wall. "All right, I'm listening. I know about you," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I know about the affairs, the emails, the custody battle. I know about everything." His face paled slightly, but he didn't say anything. "You might think Sophia worth risking your career over, but let me tell you something. She not," I continued. "You're already in enough trouble as it is. Do you really want me to make things worse?" He frowned, straightening up. "Are you threatening me?" "Not at all," I said. "I'm giving you a way out. You stop talking to Claire. No texts, no calls, no meetings, nothing. You disappear from her life completely. If I so much as hear your name come up in conversation, I'll make sure your wife lawyer gets everything they need to bury you in court." He stared at me, his jaw tightening. "You can't do that, can't I?" I asked. "I have screenshots of your public social media interactions with Claire, timestamps that match her work calendar. And if I dig deeper, I'm sure I'll find plenty more. Do you really want to take that chance?" He didn't answer, but the way his shoulders slumped told me I'd won. "You're going to walk away," I said firmly. "You're going to leave Claire alone. And you're going to stay out of my life. Do we understand each other?" He nodded reluctantly. "Good," I said, turning to leave. "Have a nice evening." When I got home, Claire was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up as I walked in. "Hey," she said cautiously. "Where were you?" "Just running errands," I said, my tone neutral. She didn't press further, but I could see the unease in her eyes. Over the next week, I watched as Michael pulled away from her. She tried to call him a few times, but he didn't pick up. When she asked me if I knew anything about it, I just shrugged and said maybe he'd realize it was inappropriate to get so close to a married woman. By the end of the week, she was quieter, more subdued. I could see the guilt eating away at her. But I didn't offer her any comfort. She'd made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. I wasn't done though. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she'd done, not just to me, but to us, to our family. I started keeping a record of everything, The night she came home late, the text she tried to hide, the excuses she made, I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it yet, but I wanted to be prepared for whatever came next. And as I sat in the living room that night, watching her pretend like everything was normal, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even hurt. I was ready. A week after my confrontation with Michael, I started putting my full plan into motion. Claire had spent most of that week acting strange, quiet at times, overly attentive at others. It was as if she was trying to gauge where I stood without directly asking. I gave her nothing. Every interaction was measured, polite, and distant. She thought she could fix this by pretending it didn't happen. But I was making sure she would feel the full weight of her choices. I spent that week compiling everything I had, bank statements, phone records, and even a timeline of events pieced together from things she'd mentioned offhand. I reviewed every detail, down to the cancelled anniversary dinner I had planned to the candlelit evening she had spent with Michael instead. By Friday, I had everything I needed. Claire was in the kitchen making dinner when I walked in, holding a manila envelope in my hand. "Can we talk?" I inquired, maintaining a composed tone. She glanced up from the stove, taken aback, and replied, "What on your mind?" "Let's sit down," I suggested, motioning towards the kitchen table. Her brow furrowed slightly, yet she nodded and followed me. I placed the envelope on the table between us and took a seat across from her. "What this?" She regarded the envelope with suspicion. "Everything," I stated. She hesitated to open it, prompting me to elaborate. "I've spent the last week documenting everything. Your meetings with Michael, your late nights, your lies. I have copies of texts, call logs, and a detailed timeline. If I wanted to, I could take this to a lawyer tomorrow." Her complexion drained of color. "Daniel, I know," I interrupted sharply. "You don't get to speak right now. I gave you a chance to explain yourself, and you insisted it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing, was it? It was a decision, a sequence of decisions you made with little consideration for me or our family." She fixed her gaze on me, her hands quivering ever so slightly. "What do you expect me to say?" "I don't want you to say anything," I said, leaning back in my chair, arms folded across my chest. "For the past 8 years, I've done everything I could to be a good husband. I've worked hard to provide for us, ensuring you and the kids have everything you need. I've been faithful, supportive, and patient. And this is how you repay me?" "It wasn't like that," she said, her voice trembling. "Then what was it like?" I asked, because from my perspective, it seems you chose to seek validation elsewhere, tears brimming in her eyes. "I made a mistake," she admitted. "I know that and I'm sorry. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you allow me." I shook my head. "That's not sufficient, Claire. Sorry doesn't undo the betrayal. It doesn't change the reality that you jeopardized our marriage for someone who doesn't even care about you." She lowered her gaze to the table, her tears staining the wood. "What do you want me to do?" She whispered, "I want you to move out," I said, and her head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. "What? You heard me," I said. "I've already packed a bag for you. You can stay at your parents' house or get a hotel, I don't care, but I need you out of here by the end of the day." Her mouth opened and closed like she was trying to find the right words, but nothing came out. "This isn't a separation," I continued, "it not a trial period or a break, it the beginning of the end. I'm filing for divorce on Monday." "No," she said, her voice breaking. "Daniel, please, don't do this." "I have to," I said. "You made your choice, Claire, now I'm making mine." She reached across the table, her hand trembling as she tried to take mine. I pulled back before she could touch me. "Don't," I said coldly. "You don't get to play the victim here. You don't get to cry and beg and act like this is something that just happened to you. You did this. You." She broke down completely then, her sobs echoing through the kitchen. I stood up and walked to the doorway, pausing to look back at her one last time. "Pack your things," I said, "and leave the key on the counter when you go." I didn't wait for her response. I walked out of the kitchen and upstairs to my office, closing the door behind me. I could still hear her crying downstairs, but I forced myself to block it out. For the next few hours, I stayed in the office, going over the final details of my plan. I had already called a lawyer and started the paperwork for the divorce. I had made arrangements for the kids to stay with my parents for a few weeks while Claire and I sorted everything out, and I had spoken to my employer about taking some time off to focus on my family. By the time I came back downstairs, Claire was gone. Her key was sitting on the counter next to the envelope I had left for her. I picked it up and flipped through the pages, making sure everything was still there. It was. I put the envelope back on the counter and sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me. For the first time in days, I felt a sense of peace, not because things were resolved, they weren't, not by a long shot, but because I finally felt like I had taken back control of my life. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure: whatever happened next, it would be on my terms. The house was quiet after Claire left, almost unerringly so. It wasn't just the absence of her presence, it was the weight of everything that had happened settling in. I sat at the table for a long time, staring at the blank wall across. From me, a part of me wanted to feel relief, like I'd finally reclaimed my life, but all I felt was an emptiness that I couldn't shake. The next morning, I woke early, I made coffee, skipped breakfast, and went through the checklist I had prepared the night before. The lawyer office was my first stop. I arrived as soon as their doors opened, my manila envelope tucked under my arm. The receptionist greeted me with a polite smile, but I could tell by the look in her eyes that she'd seen this scene play out 100 times before. "Mr. Johnson will see you shortly," she said, gesturing to a row of chairs by the window. I nodded and sat down, flipping through my papers one more time. When my name was called, I followed the lawyer into his office, a no-nonsense kind of guy in his mid-50s. His handshake was firm, his tone brisk. "Daniel, good to meet you," he said. "Let's get started." I laid everything out for him, the records, the timeline, the photos, the text logs. He took his time reviewing it all, nodding occasionally and making notes on a legal pad. "This is thorough," he said finally. "You've done a lot of the groundwork already." "I wanted to be prepared," I said. He leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the pad. "If your goal is to make this as straightforward as possible, we can proceed with a no-fault filing. However, if you want to build a case for marital misconduct, you've got a strong foundation here." "I don't want a drawn-out fight," I said. "I just want it over." "Understood," he said. "I'll draft the petition and have it ready for filing by the end of the week. Once it filed, Claire will be served and we'll go from there." The word served felt strange, like it didn't belong in a conversation about the woman I'd spent nearly a decade of my life with. But I nodded, signed the necessary documents and left the office feeling lighter, if not better. Over the next few days, I focused on moving forward. I called my parents and explained the situation, careful to keep my tone neutral. They were supportive, as I knew they would be, but I could hear the disappointment in their voices, not in me, but in the situation as a whole. They loved Claire, or at least the version of her they thought they knew. The kids were harder. Ethan and Lily didn't know the details and I wasn't planning to tell them anytime soon. I framed it as, Mommy and Daddy need some time apart to work through a few things, which seemed to satisfy them for now. They were young enough to accept it without too many questions. But I knew that wouldn't last forever. By the time Claire was served with the divorce papers, I had already started making changes. I met with an advisor to separate our accounts, transferred the utilities into my name and set up a temporary custody arrangement through my lawyer. Everything was clinical, procedural, and efficient, the exact opposite of how I felt inside. When Claire called me after being served, I almost didn't answer. I stared at the screen for a long moment before finally swiping to accept. "Daniel," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I got the papers." "I know," I said. There was a pause and I could hear her struggling to keep her composure. "Is this really what you want?" "It not about my desires," I stated, "it about what must occur." "Can we discuss this?" she inquired, merely a single time, directly in front of me. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no, to maintain distance and let the legal process unfold. Yet another part recognized that if I didn't offer this, she'd find a way to prolong the situation. "Fine," I said, "tomorrow at 3 p.m. at the house. Be there or don't, it your choice." The next day, I sat at the kitchen table, waiting. Claire arrived 10 minutes late, looking more disheveled than I had ever seen her. Her eyes were red, her hair pulled back into a loose ponytail, and she wore the same clothes from earlier that week when she picked up the kids. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," she said, sitting down across from me. "I'm listening," I replied. She took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly on the table. "I don't know how to fix this," she began, "but I want to try. I'll do whatever it takes, counseling, therapy, whatever you want. Just tell me how to make it right."